Hi, I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV from our studios here near Washington, D.C. for this special presentation from Cybersecurity TV and NeoSystems. Today we're going to have a fireside chat with the Air Force Chief Software Officer discussing CMMC, cloud security, FedRAMP, and CUI. With us now for today is the NeoSystems Chief Information Security Officer, Ed Bassett, and the U.S. Air Force Chief Software Officer, Nicolas Chaillan. We're going to have a one-on-one, one-hour chat and fireside style. We also have with us today Ms. Mary Beth Healy, who's Chief Revenue Officer with the Capital Area Food Bank, because for every participant in this webcast, NeoSystems is donating $10 to the Capital Area Food Bank. With that, I'm now going to turn it over to Ed Bassett, who's the Chief Information Security Officer for NeoSystems. Ed?
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. We have a really exciting discussion lined up for today. Before we dive into that, into the cyber realm, I want to take a moment and think about those whose food supply is not secure, and we want to do our part. We appreciate all of you attending today because, as Dave mentioned, we are making a donation for each of the attendees that are attending this event to the Capital Area Food Bank. We want to hopefully learn some useful information about the state of cybersecurity, but also want everybody to know that your participation is helping to alleviate hunger in our community. So I'd like to start with an introduction of Mary Beth Healy, Chief Revenue Officer for Capital Area Food Bank, and she's going to share a little bit about how her organization is helping our community. Mary Beth?
Thank you, Ed, and thank you everyone for being a part of this, and thank you for supporting the Capital Area Food Bank. So let me give you a little background on what we do. This year is our 40th anniversary. 48 years we've been around helping the people in the region who are food insecure. And what most people don't understand is there are about 400,000 people in DC region that are food insecure. And how we define food insecure is not necessarily knowing where their next meal is going to come from. So for instance, they may have enough money for about 5 to 6 days worth of food, and on that 7th day, they're just not sure where they're going to get the money to buy food. We typically supply them food through our 450 distribution partners throughout the area. So some of those distribution partners you may have heard of, such as Bread for the City, So Others May Eat, Alive, and Manna. We act as a food bank. We literally have a warehouse, 120,000 square foot warehouse full of food, and we distribute the food out to our 450 partners. And then they in turn send that out to our clients. And we call them our clients, and we treat them like our clients. It's very important with respect to make sure that they understand that we're here to support them as much as we can. But when COVID hit, everything flipped on its edge, and our whole distribution system did a 185-degree turn. We went from having 450 partners helping us distribute food to having less than 200 partners helping us distribute food. We went from having 75% of our food donated through different retailers such as Safeways and Costco and Amazon to having 0% of our food donated. And on the third wave of the tsunami that hit us with COVID was the social and economic impact of COVID and the 450,000 unemployment claims that have been filed since March 1st just in this area. So we're seeing anywhere from a 20 to a 60% increase in the number of people that need our help and need our food. Those 3 tsunamis came together and really flipped the whole distribution piece for us on its head. So we had to go out and find temporary partners that could help us get food out. We had to go out and purchase more food than we've ever purchased before. In April alone, we purchased 100 truckloads of food. And that's something that we normally wouldn't purchase in an 18-month period. And we did it in 1 month. And we're doing it again in May. And we see this happening through June, August, and September as well, just to meet the demand that we're seeing in the marketplace, as well as the reduction in the retail support. And that retail support is all because if you go to your retail supermarket right now, you're not going to see food on the shelf. They can't get it on their shelf, let alone get it on our shelf. So we're having to purchase it on our own. That's coming up to about $2 to $3 million a month in extra food that we're having to purchase. So your gifts today will help us meet those demands, will help us continue to feed as many people as we possibly can in the DC region. And we can see this continuing as a marathon COVID. Even if we get past the COVID infection stage, the actual economic impact of the furloughed and the lost work for many of our clients is really going to impact them for the next 12 to 18 months. So we see this as a long-term situation that we're going to try and fix as much as we can. And as much support as we can get for that is definitely appreciated. I'd love to answer any questions on that and get into more detail, but I don't want to cut into too much of your time for your fireside chat on cybersecurity today. So I will turn it back over to Ed. And again, if you have questions at the end, I will still be on and happy to answer anything.
Well, thank you, Mary Beth. Yeah, anyone in the audience who has questions for Mary Beth and also for Nicolas as we proceed, please email those in using the link that's on the event website. Those will get filtered through our moderator, and we'll ask as many of those questions and answer those questions online as we have time for. So thanks, Mary Beth. Very, very important mission. We're happy at NeoSystems to be doing our part to help out, but I would encourage ourselves, all of those of you who are listening, if you do know where your next meal is coming from and you have something extra you can contribute to that, please consider Capital Area Food Bank for some additional support. It sounds like they're having a really tough time getting the resources they need to help out, even more than would typically be in need at this time. So thanks very much, Mary Beth, for that important message. My other guest today is Nicolas Chaillan. Nicolas is the Chief Software Officer for the United States Air Force. He's coming into the Air Force as an entrepreneur, an innovator in the software space, and my understanding seeks to do no less than really transform how the Air Force builds and uses software. As a service provider, we seek to educate and assist, and I hope today's session is really valuable to all of you in the defense industrial base. I think there's probably a lot of questions out there for Nicolas in terms of how the work that he's doing interacts with those of us in the government contractor community. I'm going to be asking a few questions. Please send your questions in, as I mentioned, send them to the link on the website for this event, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we have time for today. Nicolas, welcome. And would you like to start out with just a quick overview of that Chief Software Officer role, one that's new to the Air Force, my understanding, and just how you're tackling that role and where you try to take it?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Ed, for having me, and thank you, Mary Beth, for all the work, incredible work you're doing. That's pretty incredible. Your ability to react to those events in such a timely manner is really something that we can all relate to. I think to give a little bit of background on the Chief Software Office, which was really created a year ago now at the Air Force. What we're trying to remove is any impediment or bottleneck when it comes to moving at a pace of relevance when it comes to software, adopting new technologies, whether it's cyber, AI, machine learning, deep learning related, or whether it's DevSecOps related, and trying to bring enterprise services at scale to the DoD. So this is a joint team. It's not just the Air Force. I'm leading the DevSecOps initiative with DoD CIO. So we're trying to really empower every team, every DIB partner to piggyback on what we're doing when it comes to automation, continuous accreditation, streamlining the ingestion of new capabilities with the DevSecOps initiative, and then also making sure that we understand cyber risk and bring zero trust and behavior detection as a baked-in capability within DoD, so we can actually truly understand the current cyber state of our system and embrace the zero trust culture that's now the default on the commercial side.
Very good. Thanks. Well, obviously a lot more to that than just the security piece. As security is my background, I'm going to spend some time on that, but certainly we can head off in some other interesting directions as well. A hot topic, I know not an initiative coming from your office, but is CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. A lot of conversation going on around that. It's coming our way. We all feel it coming our way. You did a podcast with us a few weeks back, and you mentioned that you felt the current self-attestation that's happening under the DFARS clause was quote unquote a joke. And I think a lot of people tend to agree with that it's not having the right effect, and we need to do something different. But in that podcast, you warned against setting the bar too high and potentially freezing out innovation. And other things that make the Air Force software program run. You spoke out against the mandate for DoD specific controls and the DoD doing things maybe differently than are happening in the commercial world and in other civil agencies, citing the need for potentially a contractor to have to meet multiple standards and even potentially undergo multiple audits just to demonstrate their worthiness to do Department of Defense work. So CMMC has talked about some reciprocity with FedRAMP, maybe even some reciprocity with ISO 27000, other recognized certificates, but that doesn't really alleviate those differences in standards, right? So CMMC has been adding sources from controls other than NIST, even creating a few new ones. By my reading, there's 22 controls in CMMC. They're not even part of the NIST 853 catalog. So a lot of contractors see this as a pretty significant challenge. So what are your thoughts on how DoD contractors should respond to this? In terms of, are we setting the bar in the right place? How should people react in a way to meet that bar, keep themselves secure, but still, be able to do business with the DoD?
No, I think you're spot on. You just pretty much summarize most of the concerns we have with CMMC. And I think the intention, of course, of ANS and Katie Arrington, who has been doing an incredible job in the last a year and a half since she joined the government at OSD. I think the one thing that we have a couple of issue with is you pointed out the custom controls. I think they are 46, I think, actually controls that are not part of the NIST framework, that are custom made. If you add it to all the 5 levels of CMMC, at least that's the last number I got. So 46 custom controls, and also the fact that we very much still piggyback on NIST 80171 and now what's going to become 172, which really, when you look at it with an auditor lens, that really requires different audits and really different assessments. And reciprocity is obviously interesting, but we all know when we actually do audits and we do assess teams and systems, that reciprocity doesn't always guarantee that it's going to happen during the audit. And quite often it comes down to the controls, right? So 2 controls might be very common and very close to each other, but if they're not exactly written the same way, or if there is a little bit of gaps between the controls, then someone might want to reassess both controls, right? And so now, if you're a company that's providing some software as a service capability, then you end up having to assess with FedRAMP and spend maybe a year, sometimes up to a year, and quite a bit of money to go through that FedRAMP accreditation authorization. And then you have now 171, 172, and the custom CMMC controls. And really, at the end of the day, that's really looking at least 2, if not more, audits and going over all the NIST controls to map that. And so mapping is never good enough, right? So reciprocity, is very vague. If you look at FedRAMP today and the way it can be used in DoD, you really have to go to FedRAMP High to even be able to tackle what we call the impact level 5, which is the highest unclass level on the cloud. And so you would have to go FedRAMP High. So details matter, right? When we say reciprocity to FedRAMP, what does that mean? Does that mean you have to be at the moderate level to go through CUI data for level 3 of the CMMC, level 5? It's until we know all the details, that's where it's just not going to scale. And my fear is now companies are going to start getting into the business of selling assessments, and then you end up having a massive amount of liability, right? If a company comes to you and say, well, you're not accredited and you're not passing level 5, now you can bid on that multi-billion-dollar contract, right? And that's going to obviously create a lot of risk, including requiring to get insurance for companies that are going to be assessing other companies out there. And so I think there's going to be a legal aspect there as well. And then finally, like you said, we don't want to get behind. We don't want to make it harder to work for the DoD, right? Cyber is obviously something very important, and having baked-in security is critical. But what we don't want is slowly but surely reducing the size of the DIB and slowly ending up with quite a few companies leaving and not being interested in working with the DoD to bring these new startup-like capabilities, which we really completely leverage now for DevOps and DevSecOps, then we will just be behind everybody else, which, by the way, ends up creating a bigger risk because now you're behind in terms of technology, which is might be even a bigger risk than the cyber risk by itself.
So it sounds like you're suggesting that we place the cybersecurity bar relatively high, but keep the administrative bar relatively low. In other words, not overcomplicate the process.
Well, the key is to have one set of controls. There's a reason why FedRAMP is using 853 controls, very much the same way we assess systems during an ATO in the government with 853 controls. I think the easiest way, right, when I spoke to Ron Ross, a good friend at NIST, who is really driving all the cybersecurity framework discussions, including the update of 853 revision 5 that's coming out now, and Ron Ross made it very clear doing an overlay on top of NIST 853 will be very easy. It's a month of work for NIST to do that. We cannot be seen as working in a vacuum. Having custom DoD controls by definition is a non-starter for me. We cannot do that. For multiple reasons. One, that's not DoD's mission. That's not what we were supposed to be doing. On top of it, we're just making the DoD more isolated, right? And so we really need to pay attention to that because the government itself is already isolated enough. If you start, cutting that into a smaller island with just the DoD, then you're really gonna get behind it and fail. And so I think the answer has to be using 853 overlays. I was always against 171, even less now 172, even less now with 46 new custom controls in CMMC. We have to go back to clear all of that and really map it all to 53. And honestly, it's something that can be very, very easily done in a month with NIST's help. They're willing to do it with us. So we're starting discussions with NIST to look into building that overlay, which really should just map to a very similar process than FedRAMP moderate.
Very interesting. So we had an event similar to this last week, and Brian Ware from CISA was on the line with us, and he talked about this program and the fact that in his mind, Brian Ware from the cybersecurity chief from CISA, and he indicated that he feels DoD is sort of leading, and that it's probably appropriate for DoD to lead in the sense that DoD is a very big buyer, very large, has a very sensitive mission. So makes some sense in his mind for DoD to sort of lead, and then maybe other civil agencies will adopt that, was kind of what he was implying, that after the ground has been plowed a little bit, it makes sense for those programs like CMMC to be expanded. But you make a very good point that DoD's mission is not in the standard making, right? NIST has that mission. And
it's also beyond that, right? I think there's a difference between leading and reinventing the wheel, right? 853 controls can assess any system today at the highest classification levels in the DoD. If we can do that at the TS, TSSCI, or even SAP level, someone is going to have to explain to me why we cannot do that for CUI, right? And so it just doesn't make any sense. So the controls are there. They're very similar. They can be rephrased if need be. We can even update 853 if we have to. That would be the right way, right? If you want to have a single set of controls, but you need to add new controls or customize existing controls, God knows that NIST has been amazing at updating different revisions of the NIST 853 controls. So there's just no reason to have a 171. That was created, from the get-go because DoD wanted to be special, and the mission of DoD is special, but the software is not.
Makes sense. So you mentioned FedRAMP, and the FedRAMP program has been around for a while, about 9 years, but we've got just over 250 cloud offerings. And I've heard numbers, I don't know that any that I would feel reliable enough to quote here, but say an order of magnitude above that in terms of the number of cloud services currently being used, but only 250 have actually made it through the program and gotten listed on the FedRAMP marketplace. So although at least from my perspective as a cloud service provider, we've seen the bar being raised, right? The level of security inherent in most cloud services has gone way up. But I have to wonder, is this program agile enough to really facilitate cloud adoption? If you can do 250 in 9 years, one of the issues of interest to our contractor audience is specifically how contractor systems are handled, right? The DoD today and the DFARS calls for these systems, if they're a contractor system, not a mission system, to be FedRAMP equivalent. So then they can process CUI and CDI. What are your thoughts on this notion of FedRAMP equivalent as opposed to authorized, ready, or other official designations within FedRAMP from a perspective of the contractor systems?
Yeah, that just makes no sense. That's never something that's going to be trusted at scale until it's clearly well defined and understood, right? We can't be vague with cyber, right? One is what level, what does that mean, equivalent versus authorized? It's just at the end of the day, words matter, and we need to understand how the system works. I think what does matter though is the FedRAMP system has been very successful. But I think it's just a little bit too broad. When I think of cloud, I think that the biggest risks at the beginning were already on the infrastructure and the platform layer, and so accrediting IaaS and PaaS layers makes complete sense. Now, where we cannot keep up and really scale is when we start touching software as a service, right? I think that's where we're never going to be able to assess fast enough. And that's where companies need to be smart about how they bring the SaaS capability to the government, right? I think there's a couple of options today. One is you piggyback on an existing FedRAMP cloud and you don't reinvent the wheel, and you're going to use either a platform or an infrastructure that's already accredited with the FedRAMP authorization. What's for sure in DoD, if you think as a DoD, if I think as a DoD customer, anything under FedRAMP High is really not usable in a meaningful way for anything touching the mission side of DoD of the weapon systems and anything meaningful, right? And really at the end of the day, most of the real capabilities that we deploy go to secret or TS, and so by definition, FedRAMP is really not bringing much value to DoD for those use cases. And for me as a chief software, I want to make sure we have complete reciprocity across classification levels, and we also have no drift and the same capabilities across all classification levels, from unclass to secret to TS to SAP enclave as well. And those are all running on clouds. We use Cloud One, we use C2S, SC2S. Cloud One is really Amazon GovCloud and Azure Government as well. So we can have two options, and then we have the IAC clouds, right, with C2S. And really, when you think of that, right, the easiest way for me to get any type of software capability going across classification levels is through the concept of containers that we're using for DevSecOps. We're pushing complete reciprocity. So my team is responsible for accrediting containers for the DoD with Platform One. So Platform One has the repo one, which is a source code repo of all the containers, and then the Iron Bank, which is the fancy name of the container repo. That's where teams can go and pull containers. And those containers, those Lego blocks, are software capabilities that could be pretty much anything that run on Kubernetes, which is what we use for the platform. But then we have complete reciprocity across all classification levels, and we can get container accredited usually between 2 to 3 weeks. So it's a very fast process for companies. So startups that are really interested in working with DoD in a meaningful way and want to tackle the weapon side and not just the 10% business side, but really going after the real meat of the budget of DoD, which is really 90% on the weapon side as it should. That's where you want to be able to run on the classified environment. And so going through FedRAMP would never get you there right now, right? You cannot run on classified clouds. But running as a hardened containers, DoD approved, and these Lego blocks can be swapped and very much still managed as a service by the companies behind the scene, but it's running on our cloud. That's the only difference, right? One is a software as a service running on a hosting that's provided by the company. The other is a container provided by the company running on my cloud, which ends up not requiring FedRAMP for the software, on top of my cloud, right? We just do a normal ATO.
Is that something that contractors could leverage for contractor systems, or is it really exclusively for mission systems?
Any capability can be used. We have right now about 90 companies using the Iron Bank to deliver continuously the software updates to different DoD programs. It becomes kind of the central ingestion repo to ingest new containers and new capabilities, new updates. We distribute the bits to the high side, so you don't have to worry about doing any of that as a company. You deliver to the end class environment, and we push it to all the classification levels. We directly integrate with the program, so it's just an easier way, right, to ingest software. Now, if it's a capability that's only beneficial to one program, that probably doesn't make sense for us to do that centrally. If it's a capability that can be used by 50 different programs or 10 or 5, I think the bar right now is at 3. So if we know the software can be used at least by 3 programs in DoD, then it can be on that repo. So any type of COTS, any type of open source stack, any type of container that benefit the enterprise can be hosted there.
Very good. And I think I heard you say maybe that by using that platform, the software vendor, if they're not running it as a true SaaS offering, they wouldn't necessarily have to take it through FedRAMP as a SaaS level, right? It's a dedicated program running in a container on a platform that's already been accredited by the Air Force. Is that right?
That's correct. And that's the difference between, I guess, a software as a service versus a COTS, right? Yep. In fact, you're becoming a COTS, you're providing managed service to manage and run the COTS. In effect, it's a managed COTS, right? So we're toeing with the line between a complete software as a service hosted versus we provide infrastructure and platform, and we provide that to the company so they can run their containers on top of that, inheriting all the cyber stack, all the compliance, all the DoD accreditation process. And more importantly, we have a zero trust enforcement behavior detection stack, so we can detect malicious code faster. We scan everything, we centrally accredit everything, and that does reciprocity across DoD.
It gives a lot of the benefits of SaaS without going all the way to a real multi-tenant software, and SaaS isn't always necessary or the right answer for a lot of those things. So I like that model a lot. So Nicolas, let me shift gears a little bit. So I know innovation has been a personal focus for you, given your software and vendor background. In the security space, we seem to be locked in an arms race. We really need to win this arms race. Speed and agility, very, very important. Speed and agility specifically mentioned very heavily in the Cyberspace Solarium Commission report that just came out in March, as far as how to increase that. But there's a lot of security processes today that are really designed to kind of slow down change. I mean, we talked about some of the bureaucracy of FedRAMP. You talked about a way that you're getting around that with kind of an innovative way to do that. I think sometimes there's a theory that, slowing things down, making it slow and careful actually reduces risk. As a security practitioner, I don't agree. Last week, NextGov published an interview with someone on your team, Major Slaughter, talked about your Platform One initiative. The article describes, some of the urgency of the COVID pandemic and really spurring that team to achieve accreditation in 48 hours. You mentioned a minute ago some, fast times to get things accredited. Major Slaughter interview, they talked about processes doing 10 code deployments per day. I mean, that's really kind of holy grail stuff in the DevSecOps world. Can you share a little bit about Platform One, how the success there around DevSecOps is going to, spur innovation maybe more broadly? You just were talking about it in terms of the containers and how that might change the game in terms of how people bring cloud-based things to life faster. What else can we expect out of Platform One in innovation-wise?
Yeah, no, Platform One has been game-changing, I think, for the department. We have now, I would say, 60 of the largest DoD programs, whether you're thinking F-35, all the nuclear system like GBSD or Aegis, whether you're thinking as the Joint AI Center, JAKE, or programs like Unified Platform or Cyber Offense Defense with Cyber Command. All of these programs are using Platform One today. And the benefits are multiple, right? You talk about the containers. We have created the containers, the Lego blocks. Everything becomes more modular and flexible, so you can try new things. You can play with new capabilities. But what's also more interesting is the DoD-wide reciprocity of the continuous ATO. And really, the concept of a continuous ATO is really game-changing. That started with Casaran and Lauren, who kind of drove that change in the Air Force initially, and now to the DoD. The CATO is about accrediting the software factory and the pipeline and the gates within the pipelines. And what comes out of the factory is automatically accredited versus accrediting the software itself, right? And so it's a scalable process. You accredit the factory, you have gates in the factory, and you know those gates. And if it passes the gates, you can go straight to production. That's game changing. Obviously, we will have a lot of bottlenecks with airworthiness and nuclear surety, and it makes sense that not everything can be completely automated from day one, and that's completely normal. We aim to reduce the bottlenecks as much as we can and automate as much as possible. And you said it very clearly. Timeliness is sometimes even more so important as just security, because if you can update and upgrade things and react to events like 0 days or cyber discoveries of issues, and you can't rapidly change your system, you're just going to create more risk. And so with Platform One, we can update containers across classifications in hours, across dozens of teams. So if we have an issue with Linux or whatever container we're using, that can be self-updated within minutes, and that's game changing for patch management, vulnerability management. It's completely automated. No need for a human to go and patch systems anymore. So a lot of those concepts will change the way we do business. One of the exciting concept is infrastructure as code and automation, and that's really about push button deployment. So being able to instantiate a DevSecOps pipeline with complete automation, no human, across any classification levels, without any drift between the environment, so you can trust it's going to be exactly the same. Everything is code. It does your change management. It enforces, whitelisting, access control, list need to know, list privilege. So it's really game changing when it comes to cyber. But because also we used zero trust as a principle around the entire stack, that's how we orchestrate the environment in runtime. And so Platform One is bringing managed DevSecOps services. We have kind of two main offering on top of the Repo One we talked about for the containers. So either you can go and pull the containers and run with it and build your own stack, and that's an option. You can just go, and it's free. Anyone can go on the repo. It's open to the world. It's on the internet, so it's open. Anyone can create an account anytime. And Repo One is just open. It's open source. We have both COTS products. So of course, people still need to buy a license of the COTS products, but other than the license, you can use the containers, and they're already approved for DoD use. Or you can go and use what we call the Party Bus. And the Party Bus is a multi-tenant DevSecOps environment where teams can just go and piggyback on the CATO of Platform One and deploy and just get access to developer tools and build software and deploy software multiple times a day. And yes, even though 10 times a day is pretty exciting for DoD, it's pretty pale in comparison to the 17,000 releases that SpaceX is doing a day, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And then the Party Bus is kind of this multi-tenant, so you don't get to pick the tools, but you just become a consumer of the DevSecOps tools. And it's great for smaller teams. It's great to get started and learn. But then if you want a dedicated enclave for larger programs, we have what we call the Big Bang. And the Big Bang is just a dedicated enclave of Platform One with complete automation, but the teams get to pick the tools they want to use. So if they have different needs of different databases or programming languages, we support 16 languages, 23 databases, so they can really end up customizing the environment to meet their specific mission requirements, whether it's they're building an embedded system, IoT, or they're building a business system or cyber offense defense system, or just an F-16 jet, and we have demonstrated we can deploy Kubernetes and containers on the F-16 jet, for example.
Very cool. I want to jump back to continuous ATO that you mentioned at the beginning of that answer. That is really a game changer. And I mean, all the concept around accreditation was developed as very system specific, and now you're talking about accrediting the factory. CMMC, interestingly, is also kind of heading in the direction of certifying organizations, not individual systems. I don't know that it quite goes down the path that you're mentioning it yet, but maybe it could. The idea being that if you've got a mature security program and that security program is doing all the right things to produce secure software, to produce secure systems and operate systems in a secure way, then maybe that process is what we really should be accrediting, not the outcome. Systems move and change way too fast for current accreditation processes. So that's indeed game changing. How do we get to that as sort of the general model? Should we be getting to that as the general model for accreditation, where we're looking at organizations, processes, factories, as opposed to systems? What do you think about that?
Well, we just started an engagement with the DSOG. So I'm the chair of the DSOG for DevSecOps, the subgroup for DevSecOps. And one of the teams, we have 11 teams doing different things, but Team 6 is writing the continuous ATO guidance for authorizing officials and SCAs and ISSMs. So that's going to become guidance for all of DoD. And we're driving this publication in the next 60 days. But the complexity there is it's much harder, right, to build a factory from scratch if you don't know how to do it, right? And so that's where Platform One came in and really can provide a factory as a service, really, right? And that's kind of the game-changing aspect there, is you don't need to build a factory so you can build software, right? You can just focus on building your software, piggyback on the Platform One options, and just inherit the CATO and focus on building your software. We support pretty much all the programming languages you want to use anyway, so there's not going to be a big difference. Of course, egos can get in a way, and people want specific tools and things like that. But overall, I think we have quite a few options. I think we have 172 containers we're working on. So really covering a broad spectrum of tools and capabilities, and an additional 50 plus AI machine learning, deep learning tools as well. So really, I think we're checking all the boxes. And I think that's a big difference of a Platform One versus other enterprise services in the past. We see Platform One as a company providing a service within the government. And so the programs are the customers, right? And so if we have no customer, we have no adoption, we don't have a reason to exist, right? And really, that's how we define priorities and how we bring the services. We look at the customer demand and bring that to the customers. And if we don't succeed, then we shouldn't exist. And really, that's how we design Platform One to begin with. Very small funding to keep the lights on, and then the rest is pay-per-use. So that's how we grow. The vision of Dr. Roper is really to bring the Platform One to the DIB. And I've been trying to initiate a few conversations with the CMMC leadership to see how we could use Platform One to potentially bring access to an already compliant environment to the smaller startups or even the big primes, so they could just piggyback on that environment and work within that environment. You still need to secure, their endpoints and things like that, and we do have some comply to connect things that we could use to ensure their device are secure to connect to the Platform One enclave. But we do have that baked into the stack, so there's a lot we could do to provide a day one instance of an environment that's already compliant, right? The key is why would every company build a custom environment? That just makes no sense, right? With cloud services, the whole point is to be able to instantiate using infrastructure as code, a completely automated and already compliant environment that has all the bells and whistles, all the tools, all the cyber capabilities already connected to the cyber teams to get access to the logs, and ensuring everything is secure from day one, right? And not as an afterthought.
Man, that's really interesting in terms of, taking this to the DIB, specifically enabling those people who don't already have it figured out, right? So the big members of the DIB that have been around for a while doing cybersecurity, they have a staff, they have processes that are mature, they have technologies they've invested in. But the most innovative parts of the DIB are these small startup organizations bringing a high level of innovation and potentially no background or core expertise in cybersecurity whatsoever. And those folks are struggling, to be frank about it. They don't have the resources there to do that. But we rely on their innovation to keep us ahead of our adversaries. We also know those adversaries are pretty good at stealing that intellectual property, and they go for the weakest link. I've heard multiple people, in the DoD talk about the fact that we're seeing attacks going after the weakest link. So how do we raise the bar for that weakest link without asking them to develop expertise that is frankly outside their core mission? So, on the one hand, we want to have kind of maximum innovation. On the other hand, we got to protect that innovation. So I guess specifically, what would you suggest to DoD members? That's who our audience on this call primarily is. If you don't have security already figured out and you're looking to buy it rather than build it, tag along to something like you've developed within the Air Force, what does that path look like? How do small companies approach and take advantage of those secure factories? If they're in the software business, I think that's pretty straightforward how it is. What if they're not? What if they're engineering, design, construction, other things, but they just need secure place to do their work for the DoD that's going to be well protected?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to what you just said, right? One is we keep saying, the DIB, the larger companies have it figured out. I don't know if that's true, right? I think we have to be very cautious.
Giving them credit.
And we have to differentiate, compliance from security, right? And I think, one can be compliant and not secure, and
True.
And so that's something to keep in mind. I also don't know how many companies actually implement zero trust in DoD, right, in a meaningful way. So I wouldn't say, they're there, right? That's for sure. That's first step. So it's not just the startups, right? It's a little foolish to think that. I think everyone has work to do to protect data, and it's a continuous engineering work, and we have work to do as well, even in platform one, right? It's never ending. And so we have to be very cautious to be so arrogant that we think we're already done and we can move on to something else. It's never ending. But the real answer to your question is, if you're not a software company particularly, I think we do have some tools, right? Like the Jira, the Confluence, all the program management kind of tools. We're working also with OSD, R&E to bring digital engineering tools. So all the tools that enable to emulate, simulate, create schemas and things like that. 3D capabilities kind of things will be on platform one as well. Also has a VDI capability as well, so you can just VDI connect, do your work, save it. It doesn't leave the cloud. It doesn't mean there is no cyber residual risk, but I think you would inherit 90% and 10% is really left to your device, right? What device do you use to connect to the cloud, which is fairly easy to secure now. Compared to what it used to be. It's also, streamlines your connectivity to the cloud. We built the first cloud native access point, which is replacing the CAP, or what the .gov side knows as a tick. And the CAP obviously is often a bottleneck because you have to VPN to Nipper to connect to the cloud, which is not a great path to connect to an elastic network on the cloud. So we built the cloud native access point with platform one on the cloud. So we have the first ever accredited cloud native access point running on the cloud, not touching the DoD. So you can directly connect to internet, right, to do CUI work without having to VPN to Nipper. So it's a much better user experience as well. It's elastic and auto scales and things like that. So I think we have all the ingredients to make this kind of a DIB offering. My one fear is that it's also not the job of DoD to provide a GFE enclaves. I mean, it could be a stopgap to help teams, but ideally, right, they should be, maybe that's an opportunity for a startup out there or a company to take the platform one code and not fork it, but really reuse the code and reuse the automation, reuse the push button deployment capability, and then deploy that on GovCloud and go to either Amazon Azure or any FedRAMP High cloud provider and provide it as a managed service to companies, right? I think doing it as a DoD organization can make sense to stop, the exfiltration and all the struggle for the smaller companies, and we do it right now with containers already. But I don't know if that's a long-term vision that we should have, because that's really, again, going away from what we should be focused on. It's good to have visibility on it, though, so I think it's also good that the DoD has direct access to know the state of its own data, right? Unfortunately, when we don't know what's going on and things are done in a vacuum with third-party organizations that we cannot understand in a meaningful way, these one-time assessment things are really honestly useless. My vision for CMMC at first was to do a continuous monitoring stack, right? It's not about paying a company to show up once a year and understand the state at instant T of that system. The next day there could be a change that would make that assessment completely worthless. But if you do have a continuous monitoring stack running, so you can see the constant state of the system, including its compliance. By the way, a lot of the controls can be automated to many degrees. Then you can really have a true representation of the risk. Doing it once a year is just not good enough.
Well, CMMC is looking at once every 3 years, is my understanding. I don't know that that's all finalized, but that's even less relevant, right? From at the pace of technology. You mentioned, I was going to go down a path of how does things like Platform One translate into commercial offerings? And you mentioned, it's not the DoD's job to supply sort of GFE, like here, do all your computing here. But I think we need to take that innovation that you've developed that needs to somehow turn into commercial offerings that can be vetted and certified. Is that FedRAMP where that happens? I mean, FedRAMP really, to me, focuses very much on the infrastructure and the operations of the cloud service provider, not so much on the consumer. So you can buy a perfectly secure cloud and use it in a horribly insecure way, right? It can have features that are terrible if you configure and use them wrong. So I assume when you're looking at things like Platform One and letting people consume that they don't necessarily have to be security experts to use it, right? It should come in a configuration that's secure, should be able to tell them when they're doing things that are good and when they're doing things that are bad, warn them or stop them. What do you think that path looks like to take some of that and get it out into commercial offerings like we can consume today from Microsoft, Amazon, other big cloud providers?
Well, honestly, I think we see the adoption also of the container concept also with companies that do provide software as a service and infrastructure as a service, like Microsoft and Amazon and Oracle and others. They are also a customer of the Repo One and Iron Bank, where they push their containers. So you can go right now and download SQL Server on my repo, right? And that's something that's already accredited, and you can use it all the way to the SAP classification level. So companies are embracing it. I think the long-term solution has to be a mix between GFE and services provided by the companies, because if the government has no visibility on what's going on on the logs and telemetry and continuous monitoring side and providing some cyber assistance in case of incidents, monitoring the stack, most companies don't have the right team to do that continuous monitoring work. And so be able to use the government to do that and piggyback on the investment made on the continuous monitoring side of DoD, that would make sense. Piggybacking on a FedRAMP cloud, obvious, you inherit the infrastructure as a service and the platform as a service services. So don't reinvent that, of course. And then the Delta, if you can use containers and you use the Platform One code, meaning you can take the code and just deploy it inside that cloud environment that you picked, then in effect you will inherit the reciprocity of those Lego blocks, right? So you inherit the reciprocity of FedRAMP, you inherit the reciprocity of databases and things like that to build your product. You inherit the reciprocity of the containers for the commercial product, like the Jira of the world, the GitHub, GitLab of the world, right? Now you can really provide that as a managed service, pretty much as a marketplace of tools, right? The tools are already accredited and assessed centrally by Platform One, but you are providing the service of making that easily accessible to the DIB partners, and that's where it makes it easily instantiable in a push button kind of way, with the dedicated the key is really to have the dedicated enclave for multi-tenant mitigation kind of risk, so there's no spillage across tenants. But that's all that we automated it with Platform One. It's fairly easy. In effect, you need kind of a Platform One from the commercial side.
Very good. I have about 100 more questions, but I'm gonna stop my list and take a look at some of the questions that have come in from the audience. We've got just a few minutes left here. So let me read off a few of these things that were sent in by the audience. If you have others, folks that are listening, please email them to the link on the vet website. First question: How do you think the current and future situation where people are working from home almost exclusively, how's that going to affect our as we move forward, compliance, security? What's the long-term effect of that shift, do you think?
Well, I can tell you that the way we orchestrated that risk in DoD was just not good enough, right? We let teams using their own personal device to connect to DoD Office 365, both laptops and cell phones. That's a massive risk for DoD, but it's also a bigger risk for the employees and contractors, right? Because now, if your device has a malware or some issue, someone can come and seize your device. If there's a leak or if there's an issue, that's just not the kind of risk we want to put on top of our people. I think that's not fair to be in such a situation. Letting teams, because again, if you have a malware that's logging everything you type or see on your screen, and you connect to that cloud, it doesn't make the information secure, right? Those malware can exfiltrate the data without even the user knowing. And so we really take a lot of risk when we let unknown, untrusted devices connect to DoD systems. That's why when we build the cloud native access point, we brought in device enforcement and comply to connect to really understand, before allowing the connection to happen, the state of the device, if it's patched, if there's any type of endpoint protection system running, to know if it's passing the scans, at least some basics of malware protection, right? You don't want to just hope for the best. And so that has to be done, because it's just a risk. At the end of the day, it's a bigger risk for the people than it is for DoD, because what happens when someone comes and sees your $700 phone and smashes it, to destroy it? Who is going to pay for that device again? That's just not fair to anybody. So we want to be very careful there. So in the Air Force, we're bringing bring your authorized device, and the team at SEC is redesigning a model that's going to make sure that we wouldn't have to destroy or seize the device if something happens. And that's really important. You can't just do it with no sandboxing within the device. The data cannot spill over the personal device or be saved on the personal device, because now if there's a mistake, someone putting a classified document on an unclassified email, now you have to destroy the device and all that good stuff. So it's just not fair to anybody. And so that's something that we need to pay attention to. I think the default now is going to be providing access to the right tools to get the job done anywhere, at any time, ideally on any device, as long as you understand the device state. And so that's really where we're going, and that's where automation will be critical to ensure we can understand what's going on and allow access to all these tools.
Very good. Next question is for vendors and contractors that are looking to utilize DoD systems for hosting their solutions. How would you recommend they engage DoD and program leadership to start the process? So presumably try to get access to Platform One. What's the entry gate look like there? Yeah,
so if you Google if you go on software.af.mil So that's a CSO website, software.airforce.af.mil. There's a section called DSOP, DSOP, DevSecOps. And then there's a page called Documents. So that's software.af.mil/DSOP/documents. If you go there, there's a link to the onboarding page to know exactly what has to be done to push your containers to the repo. And so that's a central place. You go there, you can push your containers usually within 2 to 4 weeks, unless your scans really have a lot of cyber findings, in which case you probably want to fix your stack. We still see companies, unfortunately, forgetting about cyber, updating dependencies. You're responsible for every dependency you bring in the container. If you use an end-of-life database, or you use something outdated, or you forgot to update in 13 years, some dependencies, and I'm using real-life examples here without mentioning names because I'm nice today, that really tells you that you need to do better in securing your software. And dependencies of dependencies matter, so you really want to scan your container. We use Twistlock and Encore to scan containers right now. That's how we assess containers. So you want to probably have your own scan done first, so you know the cyber risk you're bringing with you, and making sure you fix as much as you can.
Good. We're not going to get to all these, but I'm going to get to one more. We've got just 2 minutes left. Given that Platform One and most of the other initiatives wholeheartedly embrace cloud native, would you say that regular web applications are now what we would call legacy applications?
Well, yeah, it depends, right? Because it depends how they're architected. At the end of the day, cloud native applications are, I guess, also web applications to some degree, right? So I would say it depends. But yes, I would say anything that's not containerized, not auto-scaling, not flexible, not microservice-based, big monolithic applications, web-based, that's legacy all day long.
Makes sense. Nicolas, thank you very much. This is very, very interesting. I have just a minute if you want to make any closing remarks, and then we'll turn it back over to Dave to close us out.
No, just thank you for having me. And again, always visit that website, software.af.mil. We have all the content training videos. We have the link to the code. We have the source code repo, the container repo. Everything is there. So if you need more information, you can also shoot us an email at usaf.cso@mail.mil. That's U.S. Air Force, usaf.cso, Chief Software Office @mail.mil. And thank you for having me.
Nicolas, thank you very much. Dave, back to you.
Thank you, Ed. An excellent presentation. Again, this has been a Fireside Chat with Nicolas Chaillan, who's the U.S. Air Force Chief Software Officer. So it's really been a great one in a number of ways, too, because we had participation from Mary Beth Healy, Chief Revenue Officer from the Capital Area Food Bank. There were way over 250 participants, and that times $10 is what will get donated by NeoSystems for this presentation to the Capital Area Food Bank. I want to thank you all for joining us. I'm Dave Gardy for Cybersecurity TV from our studios here near Washington, D.C. Thank you.